Hello there, I'm John Madden and I want to talk to you about this table I have here. Now I made this table about 25 years ago when I was living in Sydney from from memory, what I think it is recycled tallow wood, maybe some Sydney blue gum. And it's had a bit, as you can tell at the moment, it's had a bit of a long and difficult history. But what I can say about it, which is really nice, is that it's got lovely proportions. And when you actually sit around and eat dinner, it's a really pleasant experience because it just feels right. But you know, that's a design consideration that for another time. Today we're going to look at, you know, how can we bring this once beautiful hardwood table back to something that's more respectable. Now, the original finish that was used on this table was basically a spray-on 2-pack lacquer finish. I think it was a Mirrortone product. But because it's, you know, they spent a bit of time out in the sun periodically, because it did have a short life as a semi-exterior table, all that original lacquer is actually starting to peel off and it's looking pretty shabby. So what I've decided to do is that we're going to cut all this back and repolish the table to bring it back up to its original finish, level of finish. Now, the table has been a eucalypt build. You can see the table has moved around a little bit, which is pretty normal for a eucalypt tabletop, particularly when it's had sun exposure. But I don't mind that. I think it actually adds a lot of character to the table. So we're going to ignore trying to repair all these little gaps and stuff and just focus on getting a really nice mellow finish to enhance that old world feel that it's starting to establish. You can buy a lot of products on the market, like paint stripper style products, to actually help get this old lacquer off. But you can see that this, you know, this is virtually peeling off all by itself. So I think if we get the sander out and hit it with 120 to start with, it will be very easy just to strip off this old lacquer and start to bring that finish up to a level where we can apply a new finish. Now, I'm going to go with an oil finish for the next stage of its life. I think that would help enhance the kind of slightly distressed look that the table's got. But we'll talk about the type of finish and how we do that later. Let's get on with the sanding. So to get all this lacquer off, we're going to use my trusty Festool sander. Now, it looks slightly beat up, that's because it is, but I've had this sander for about 15 years now, and if you're in the market for a sander, I recommend Festool. So I've got a 120 grit paper on here, we've got the extraction set up over there, so ripping off this old lacquer should be no problem whatsoever. So let me just switch on the sander, we'll get straight into it. Right, you've seen me sanding away now. Whew. And so let's talk a little bit about orbitals. Now, this is a Festool. In my opinion, like I said earlier, it's a great machine. And how can you tell a great orbital? Well, you can switch it on and it'll sit there by itself. The machine is just balanced. Balance is what you want in an orbital. And also, when you're using an orbital sander, it's not okay to go across the grain. You got to stick to the rules, go with the grain. It's okay to work an area because the orbital action will help relieve cross-cutting across grain, but in a general sense, try to stick sanding back and forward along the grain. You're just going to improve results. Good orbitals also have a hole pattern in their base. That means that when the extraction kicks in, any dust that's created is automatically removed from the surface. So you want that because you don't want that dust interfering with the cutting action. It destroys the paper and it just slows down the whole process. So when you get an orbital, make sure it's balanced, make sure it's got plenty of holes on the underside. Velcro is the only way to go. Okay, we've managed to get a fair bit of the lacquer off in this area here now. Looking at the piece, I can see here that I think that most of the lacquer has already been removed, and when I put a 180 grit paper on there, that'll be easily brought up to a level where a finish can be applied. An important point though, on an old table like this, it's got some blemishes on there that it's acquired over the years. To start with, you've got some old nail holes, which are probably when this wood was living as another object, either as a crate or maybe a bench somewhere. It's got you can see this black gum line here. That was probably created when the tree, when it was still alive, was in a fire or something like that. But I particularly like this black ring, or this outline of this black ring that's here. So for a short time, this table was at my mother's house, and she's used it, being a keen gardener, as an outdoor table to do potting mix. And she's probably left a wet bucket there for a few days or something, and it's created this, I guess in some people's opinion, ugly black ring. For me, I love this. I'm going to try to leave this in the table as much as I can. So when I'm sitting here in 20, 30 years time and she's long gone, I can see this black ring and say, my mother made that mark on the table. In my opinion, this is why we do this kind of work. This is why we invest into making handmade objects, because these handmade objects capture history and reminds you of the places you've been and the people who've been in your life. This is perfect. Okay, here we are underneath the table. I feel a little like George Costanza, but you know, I won't stop for a sleep, we'll carry on. So the underside of this table doesn't need a full strip like the upper side. Not being exposed to the sun, and at the end of the day you don't really see under here anyway. So rather than trying to strip off all this rather tough 2-pack polish, I'm just going to give it a light sand using some 320 sandpaper, and just to burnish up, to rough up that surface a little, and then we can finish it off with using a little bit of cabinet maker's wax or beeswax. Now, there's all sorts of beeswaxes available. Here at TimberCon, we sell the Gillies versions. This is the cabinet maker's wax. There's a whole bunch of different types within the Gillies range, but I've just chosen this particular one because when I've finished polishing this underside, I can use this sort of average wax to polish machines, or put it this way, it's handy to have wax around the workshop to do all sorts of stuff. The best way to apply the wax is using steel wool. Now this is a super fine steel wool, and you can tell it's super fine because it says here in the box super fine. But it also says 400000. Yeah, super fine. So take a little bit of this steel wool out. It comes in these kind of weird rolls, and you break a bit off. You know, just to make like a little pumicey kind of thing like this. And the secret to waxing is to use it sparingly. So I've sanded up this little leg section here a little, and I'm going to put a little bit of this wax on the steel wool, just like that, and then using a circular motion, just apply it all over the surface. And you can see how at the same time as that it's applying the wax, it's just cutting that surface a little, so you get a nice mellow tone to the finish. This will take a little while to do, so we won't go right through the whole process, but if you let that dry a little, then you can come along in, say, I don't know, half an hour or so, depending on the weather, and just give it a bit of buff. And I know that looks completely the same as it did a moment ago, but once you do all the surface, you get all these little shiny nicks and cuts and stuff out of there. The wax will really help you to conceal any of those blemishes. And this is a pretty typical product to use if you've got a lovely dining table and you've got a little nick where Johnny bit into the tabletop or something. A little bit of beeswax, you can hide in most of those kinds of blemishes. Can you put beeswax on lacquered furniture? Now, lacquered furniture, in this context of this piece, this is a modern 2-pack lacquer, so this is pretty much inert, and doesn't matter what you put on the surface of it, nothing's going to interact with that finish, nothing's going to react with that finish. So, like I said, if you take a little bit of beeswax and you've got a scratch or something, and using sparingly, just rub it on, you can create a nice mellow finish. It won't react with the polish, and you can use it to hide little scratches or take out other little blemishes. It won't create any long-term damage to the surface. In fact, you can use it to enhance the piece, especially something that's aged a little. It won't get rid of things like watermarks or round, people leave a beer on a table overnight and you get a white ring. It will not get rid of that. Only time will get rid of that. But yeah, you can use beeswax on lacquered finishes. Maybe not on shellacs and things like that, but definitely on these modern hard finishes. Yeah. I've spent some time working on the table and I've sanded all that lacquer off, and now it's really starting to look great. I've managed to maintain some of these nice old blemishes, and the table's been sanded to 180 grit all over, which is great for all types of finishes, oils and lacquers. But to refinish this table, I've chosen Levos countertop oil. It's easy to use, it gives you a lovely clear finish, and it's got a really easy cleanup. So we're going to stick with that. To apply this oil, ordinarily if I was using an oil, I would use the 4O steel wool, superfine steel wool, and burnish it on in a circular motion to really burnish and oil the surface. But here in the instructions it says I can use a paintbrush to apply and then use a rag to remove the excess. I've had every expert in the building telling me no one uses a brush to oil furniture, but because it says it in the instructions and I'm such a person who likes to follow the rules, I'm going to stick with a brush. The table's now had 2 coats of oil, and I've let it dry for about 24 hours between each coat to make sure everything hardens up really nicely. Now it's hard to predict how many coats of oil any one piece of furniture needs. Generally it's 3, maybe 4 coats. It really depends on the type of timber. I feel that this table needs 1 more coat of oil. If you look across the surface, you can see there's some shiny patches and some flat patches. So to prep up ready for the last coat, the 3rd coat, I'm going to take some 4O steel wool and go all over the surface of the table to cut back any blemishes, cut back any extra oil that's still on the surface, and flatten it out so we can put that last coat on to get a nice flat finish. It's pretty simple. Little bundle of 4O steel wool, and in a circular motion, moving with the grain, cut that surface back. Now you can use, say, a 320, 400 grit paper, but the steel wool for me does the job great, and it doesn't get as clogged as much as sandpaper. So this steel wool is a great way just to burnish that surface back and you get a nice flat looking finish. Because what you're effectively doing with the steel wool is that you're not cutting through oil, you're actually buffing the surface of the actual raw timber. So it's a great way to build a really lovely glowing finish.